Hey guys, what's going on? It's Dan, and I am joined today by Solinor. How you doing, Solinor?
I'm good. I'm Solinor, aka Chad, and yeah, the title speaks for itself.
Yeah, absolutely. You can always follow his socials at the man who maxed Lorantis on Twitter and Lorantis Dude on Twitch. But thank you for joining me today for our Code Red Division power rankings. Yeah, we're just excited to go over some of these drafts, talk about how they were going. Before we get into it, I just wanted a quick mention of the methodology that I use. I know it's not necessarily the one that you use, but it's basically
hmm
that coach and play style is not taken into consideration, and it's just rating the teams. And it doesn't necessarily mean we think one team's going to beat the other head to head, but just how they would do versus the field as a whole. Do you have anything you want to add about how you in particular went through this rating process?
Yeah, typically when I rate teams, it's more or less just like a personal feel. Most people who are, draft league players who are watching power ranking content like this, they have their own kind of sense of judgment on what they think is good, what they've seen to be good and bad. And I typically go about that the same way. I don't, like you, I don't really judge players or coaches or, personal feel for the most part. But I do look at the team and I look at how I think this team is like works, how good I think it is, um, and that's typically how I rate teams like that. So pretty similar to yours. Um, yeah, in the past I know the two of us typically make our own PRs, but uh, yeah, this time we're teaming up, we're joining forces to cover the biggest aspect of the PDCL yet.
Yeah, absolutely. And before we get into it, I just also wanted to mention that we have had a couple matches played so far, but they are not taken into consideration for these rankings. These rankings are done based solely off of the quality of the teams.
Yep, week zero power rankings.
But with that being said, let's go ahead and dive into our number 16 ranked team. We have Goomer. Goomer's team was very interesting. For those of you who haven't seen his team reveal, I highly recommend it, and this would make a lot more sense. But his team was really built around the concept of he wanted to spell out Mountain Dew with the first letter of all of the Pokemon on his team. You can rearrange it, and it will spell out Mountain Dew. So with that, he's probably had the most successful draft. But looking at the team itself, it does come in 16th. It does have some rather glaring weaknesses, which one would expect when you sort of pigeonhole your entire team into the letters that you need the team to start with. Urshifu
Yeah,
and Inteleon are, obviously strong, but the rest of the team, there's some questionable choices. Like, what on this team wants to Dynamax besides Moltres and Inteleon? Or why are there two poison types on a team? Like, there's just some things on this team that leave me questioning how it's going to work overall. I do think some things like weakness policy Moltres next to Togedemaru, making it like really bad Moltres G, just use Moltres K instead, like something like that could work. Like, there are some cool synergies here, but what do you think about Goomer's team? I don't know. I'm not feeling this one so much right now.
yeah. For me, I'm looking at this team and there's just like too many pieces on it that just kind of don't feel exceptionally good, and the pieces that he has don't even feel like some of the best options like at their job. So like you think of like Togedemaru, who's considered a decent Pokemon, but it's like not better than Raichu by any standards. Um, and Teleon is typically not the style of water type Pokemon that you see on teams in general. And to be honest, like this team feels like it's rolling with like kind of creative synergies, which is like my nicest way of putting it. Um, whereas like nothing is kind of like obvious in your face as to like what is going to be good. And so I guess the one thing Goomer really does have going for him is like kind of an element of surprise type beat where you could be prepping for Moltres plus Togedemaru because it's one of the most obvious synergies on the team, and then Goomer comes in with an Urshifu and lead instead, or a Inteleon Nidoqueen or something like that. So I don't know. I don't think that the max options are fantastic, and I think that in a Dynamax format, it's like really important to have dangerous max options. So curious to see how he's gonna overcome that, especially on the physical end of the spectrum. A lot of these Pokemon are not very physically powerful that can Dynamax. Urshifu is typically not wanting to max, so an interesting conundrum Goomer has put himself in.
Yeah, I can agree with a lot of that. I mean, he does get to catch that giant Wailord in the Isle of Armor, so that's cool, I guess. But it is going to be an interesting team to see how he decides to pilot this team throughout the season, because I do think he's put himself behind the 8-ball just from the team power and synergy standpoint, but we do know that Goomer is an excellent coach, so I expect him to come up with some creative things throughout the season. But let's move on to our number 15 ranked team, and I'll let you take this one. We've got Orange Soda.
So with this team, it's weird because, Metagross was the first pick, and Metagross is typically one of those team-defining Pokemon where, the team picks Metagross first, and then the rest of the draft is figuring out ways to kind of make Metagross the star of the show, because Metagross is that guy, typically. But this team decided not to do that. They instead kind of, went with like a different secondary mode, Comfey Goodra, which is, relatively good. And they did do a good job of picking a Pokemon which I think is like one of Metagross's best partners, which is Rotom Wash. I think that Rotom Wash is a fantastic Metagross partner. Their capability to Dynamax either one of them is really dangerous because they cover for each other's weaknesses pretty well. But like the rest of the team just really isn't it to me. Corsola is strong, yes, but not impressive really in any way. It's it takes Trick Room to make it really function, and it's really frail. And then the Thwacky Hitmonlee stuff is just not quite my favorite use of terrain plus Unburden. Thwacky is typically underwhelming in Dynamax formats, so there's just like a lot of weird components to this team, and it doesn't really feel like it's been built around its star properly.
Yeah, it definitely feels like more of a Goodra team than a Metagross team to me, which is not necessarily a bad thing, because Goodra is another one of those Pokemon that can just take over sets pretty easily, especially with that massive special bulk paired with Metagross's massive physical bulk. You're generally going to have a good switch in for different attacks. But you're right, I think it's missing a lot of immediacy for power. Like, it's got the Corsola and it's got the Hitmonlee to some extent and the Metagross, but a lot of the other Pokemon on this team don't hit very hard without being set up, and the way that they get set up is basically universally something in Comfey. So Comfey is going to be a really high leverage Pokemon on this team, but it's going to be relegated to a lot of setup, which I think is going to limit some of the cooler sets that it could use. So I do think that this team is sort of limited in that regard. I don't think it's a bad team by any stretch. Like, Metagross Goodra obviously can just win some games, activate a weakness policy on one of them, and it's going to go to town. But there are some very noticeable weaknesses on this team.
Yeah, the coolest thing I thought about just now was Corsola gets the ability Weak Armor, and so with Salazzle support, you could beat up next to Corsola and like Weak Armor, which gives you a speed boost whenever you get hit by an attack, and like run a weakness policy set. You may be at -4 defense after the turn is over, but you'll definitely be at +6 Corsola and +2 special attack or physical attack if you want to. So that could be some fun tech we see. But besides that, like, you're really, like you were saying, you're really relying on Comfey to set things up, and you're relying on Archeops to be that bulldoze plus Tailwind Mon for Metagross. So yeah.
It's an interesting team, but I think this also speaks a bit to the power level that was drafted in this format, that this is the number 15 team. Because
Agreed.
In number 14, we've got Robbie, who has a Trick Room team, and then also has a Regieleki and a Darmanitan G on it. So Robbie's got the Torkoal and the Regieleki, so there's a difference of base 180 in speed tiers in his first 2 picks. So obviously he's got the range of speed that you want to see. And then with the Togetic, Uniclus, Domji, Drampa, Scrafty, Steelix, Trevenant, Vileplume, Yamper, all but 2 of those Pokemon really prefer being in Trick Room. I guess, I don't know if Yamper does or not. Yamper doesn't count. But the Vileplume and Darm are fine in fast modes, but everything else is really a Trick Room Pokemon to some extent. And this team commits heavily to Trick Room, and I think it gets hurt a bit by my overall methodology in the ratings, because there are some teams that are really, really soft to Trick Room ahead of this team that this team is going to absolutely just destroy. But this team is so reliant on Trick Rooms that teams that aren't soft to Trick Room and have good Trick Room denial are going to be a struggle for this team. And this team is so reliant on Trick Room, but it also has Regieleki. So there's just some cognitive dissonance going on in my mind about the game plan. I understand the variety of attacks are going to be just absolutely massive on this team, but just what 6 gives you sets of reasonable 4 that give you both Trick Room and non-Trick Room consistently? And that's sort of where the cognitive dissonance is for me. But you're a resident Regieleki expert. How do you think this team does overall in utilizing Regieleki?
I think that it's interesting because with Regieleki, the thing I learned is that you need redirection for Regieleki, and the only 2 redirection mons that really count are Togetic and Togekiss, because of their ability to take away Max Quack. Typically, Regieleki can take an Earthquake just fine, because when you Dynamax it, it's able to take that, but those big Dynamax super effective stab moves, typically Regieleki can't take that. So when you have Togetic on the board, it's actually fantastic support for a Lucky, because it's forcing you to not use your best ground move against a Lucky, which can be a really powerful thing. I also appreciate the Darm G as well on this squad, because Regieleki can pair nicely with Darmanitan, and Darmanitan's really good at exterminating ground types too, just because the nature of its stab, guerrilla tactic, ice punches or icicle crashes. Stab ice is really powerful offense. So I think for being a Trick Room team and having as many resources invested into Trick Room as this coach does, they have enough for a Lucky. They have Intimidate Fake Out for it, which is appreciated. They have Redirection, immune to Max Quack for it, and then they have a resident ground type Slayer as well. I know that you mentioned the Torkoal. The Torkoal is an interesting pick as well, because they did manage to get Vileplume, and Vileplume actually has what's that move that Lilligant gets that carries it with Torkoal?
After you?
Yeah. Vileplume, while not being as fast as Lilligant, also gets After You, so teams that aren't ready for After You plus Eruption can still find themselves on the receiving end of a Specs, Torkoal, and the Sun clicking Eruption against them faster than they were anticipating. So, they've got some options outside of Trick Room as well. To me, weakest part of the team actually comes from the Trick Room mode itself more than it comes from the outside of Trick Room mode. Because I'm actually just not a very big fan of most of these Trick Room mons here, which I know is probably a little surprising to you, because you were saying that the Trick Room is kind of the heart and soul of this team, but I realistically think it's the weakest part of this team, to be honest with you.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting.
I find myself really underwhelmed by, Steelix. Steelix is not a Pokemon I consider to be very good. Trevenant and Reuniclus are, they're okay with regards to being Trick Room setters, but neither one of them are exceptional. Reuniclus really gets hurt by its lack of coverage, and Trevenant is neither bulky nor strong, so I think that it's the second best grass type on this team, which is typically not something you could say for most teams.
Yeah, that's true. But I think Drampa is something that's really good under Trick Room, and I think this team's not going to struggle with the consistency of getting up Trick Room with both Togetic and Scrafty.
I can agree with that. I do think that the team won't have any issues with getting Trick Room up, and that Drampa is a scary mon. But I think that the best part of this team comes from what they've been able to build around Regieleki. One thing, and this will be my last thing, but one thing I really don't love about this squad is, I understand it's a Torkoal team and that, you're not typically going to be wanting water types on a team that's utilizing Sun, but this team feels like it could probably use a water type somewhere. I know it can be hard to like fit one on the team, especially with game plans and everything, but I don't know. It really feels like this team could definitely use a water type Pokemon on it.
Yeah, defensively that makes some sense, considering how few fire resists are actually on this team. That does make some sense. But yeah, I think this is going to be an interesting team. I expect Robbie to pick up some wins with it, probably both in and out of Trick Room, but the consistency and the flexibility of the options are what make me most worried.
I agree.
With that being said, let's move on to Yasha's team that we have at number 13, and I will let you take this one.
Yeah, I mean, so you look at this squad, and it has a lot of mons, and most of them are relatively straightforward. Thundurus is obviously one of the biggest wild cards every week, so that helps Yasha out a little bit. But otherwise, it's not going to be too crazy. Crocodile will be an offensive sweeper of some regard, whether it's bulky or just full speed, like Life Orb, Moxie type, whichever one. Either way, it will be serving that style of role. Tangela most of the time will be, bulky redirection plus maybe Sleep Powder. Heatran is going to typically be your either bulky or fast Dynamax option. Pheromosa can be a little more of a mixed bag, but it just feels like a lot of these mons are relatively straightforward, and then you have the wild card of Thundurus on there. So in some sense, it's a super straightforward team both to play and to prep for. And for me, that personally held this team back a pretty significant amount, because just being able to come up with some wild shit, I'm not really seeing anything wild on this team that couldn't be prepped for. And so I have a little bit of a hard time personally putting this team up super high. That's about my thoughts on it.
Yeah, I can agree with a lot of that. I think this team has fewer pieces that will come every week than some of the teams that are going to be rated above it. Looking at this team, you expect the Thundurus, you expect the Crocodile, you expect the Heatran, you expect the Tangela every week. You maybe expect the Kingdra to some extent as well, or the Pheromosa, and then things like the Noibat, Regice, Lopunny, and Rapidash aren't going to be coming as much. So this isn't a super deep team. The top of it I think is really good, but I do think it's missing some flexibility. And with that top core, I think it's also missing a lot of speed control. This is one of those teams that I think is a bit soft to Trick Room. It obviously has a lot of different offensive sets. I've generally been underwhelmed by offensive Thundurus in draft. I generally prefer the support sets, which I know is blasphemous, but I've been underwhelmed by the output of the Thundurus. And then the Heatran, it doesn't really have great ground redirects. Yes, Tangela can do it, but not nearly as well as, like you were saying, a Togekiss or a Togetic, because they're flying and Follow Me can't be immune with an item yet. So I don't know. There's a lot to like about this team. There's a lot of really solid pieces. I just don't think they mesh together perfectly well, and then I think it's lacking some depth, and a lot of the low tiers aren't going to have as big a role in my mind as they will on some other teams, which leaves this team with a couple question marks for me, which I think is why it came to this point in our rankings.
Yeah, the order that the team shows up on the list, it's in draft order, right? Which with what pick? Thundurus was first pick, Crook was second pick.
Yes, that's correct. Unless they made a free transaction, then that drop-in trade happened in that slot. But generally, yes.
Because the only thing I'm seeing is Noibat was pick number 6, and that's unless that was like a free agency move, then that's kind of confusing to me. Why Noibat would be like a number 6 overall or like a 6th round pick. Because I just feel like there might be better value elsewhere. But yeah, I agree with you. I think that one mon that you might have left out, like I think like you mentioned Pheromosa. I think Pheromosa is being asked to do a lot for this team. And typically teams that ask too much out of Pheromosa will often like not get as much out of it. Because this team is asking, Pheromosa, make Thundurus and Crocodile capable of doing damage. Pheromosa, give me speed control with Icy Wind or Electroweb. Oh, Pheromosa, I need really strong fighting type damage output this week. Pheromosa, I need this. Pheromosa, I need that out of you. And it's like, if you ask too much out of Pheromosa, she just won't deliver in that way.
Mm-hmm.
And I realistically think that this team is asking quite a lot out of Pheromosa. So that worries me a little bit.
Yeah, I agree with that. Okay, so for Yasha's team, I just checked. Yasha had a pick skipped because the timer expired, and that was the 6th round pick, so the Noibat was the pick at the end of the draft that filled that slot.
I see. That's more understandable.
Yeah, that makes a lot more sense. You're right, because that was a weird one.
But yeah, that's pretty much all I have to say. I mean, there are pieces on this team. It is a very straightforward team, so we'll just see if Yasha can prove me wrong and find some creative ways to bring these mons out.
Yeah, absolutely. And up next, we've got our 12th ranked team, and we got the Togekiss, Naganadel, Sneasel, Escav, Terrakion, Decidueye, Slowbro, Centiskorch, Stunfisk, and Double. Okay, this team's weird in that it's really slow and it doesn't have Regieleki. But it does have Togekiss and Naganadel, which I think work really well together. And it's also got some threatening, like, beat-up options into a Terrakion. I really like Decidueye. I think the Trick Room mode on this team is very solid as well. Like, there is so much that I like about this team, but it's just, like, nothing at base 130 speed and no way to consistently set Tailwind, and that's really going to hurt this team in my mind. Like, if Naganadel still had Tailwind, this team would be rated a lot higher, I think. But it doesn't, so it's not. I mean, there's not too much else. Like, you can see the offensive power that this team has. You can see some of the defensive capabilities, the flexibility with some of these Pokemon. But if Trick Room's going to be denied, or you're trying to go for some of the early Pokemon that you drafted instead of just that Trick Room mode, and someone else that's Tailwind against you, like, Naganadel isn't bulky enough that it wants to be taking hits and hitting back second. Like, that's a Pokemon that needs to go first. Same with Terrakion. And I think the lack of Tailwind's really going to hurt this team. But what do you think?
Yeah, this team is really, really asking a lot out of Togekiss. And, I mean, typically Togekiss is, it's that guy. It can typically do a lot for a team. But, I mean, you're asking Togekiss to redirect Dragon and ground moves away from Naganadel and helping get up Trick Room. Also, we haven't really been doing this, but on the left is the Pokemon that Dan has selected for the mon to keep an eye out on, and on the right is the one that I have selected, which in my case would be that Sneasel. And as you mentioned, Sneasel is like basically the fastest thing on this team. Naganadel counts to an extent, but Sneasel can't be faked out, so it's typically a little easier to see as like speed control. And Sneasel's being asked to do a fair bit for this team, and I kind of have the same worry with it as I did with Pheromosa in the last team, because Sneasel does a lot here. You have beat up for Terrakion and Ice Shard for Policy on Kiss or Naganadel, or even, I guess, like Decidueye realistically. Fake out, and I think this mon gets Fake Tears as well, so that could be interesting support. But yeah, you're right. I think that this team, like, realistically really struggles with the Tailwind matchup. And most of these Tailwind teams, they have bulky taunt users, bulky fake outs, or bulky imprisoned Trick Rooms. And I think with a team like this also, you have to be really careful, because you need support next to Slowbro, right? Like, if you're trying to get Trick Room up, Slowbro is your setter. You need fake out, or you need Togekiss to redirect. And I worry that Slowbro is just a little bit too passive of a Trick Room setter, where that could be abused by opposing teams who just like will stall out Trick Room with Slowbro on the field.
Yeah, that definitely makes a lot of sense. Like, if you get a Snarl off as this team's trying to set Trick Room into a Togekiss and Slowbro, you can really just start wasting those Trick Room terms pretty quickly, and I think that's going to be a potential issue for this team. But a lot of cool tools, a lot of powerful tools, and I don't know. Every time I do power rankings, I just really like the Naganadel teams, and I'm excited to see what Naganadel does, and I always get disappointed. But maybe I won't be disappointed this time, because I think Naganadel's a cool Pokemon, and I hope to see it do well this time.
Yeah.
But, moving on, team number 11, we have Ronin Sting. Do you want to take this one?
Yeah. So, this team was so close to winning me over. You have a bunch of badass Mons on this squad, like Golisopod and Lucario, Tapu Koko and Latios, like just very cool team. Tapu Koko is probably my favorite terrain setter in these Dynamax formats, besides like arguably Rillaboom maybe. And there is a certain Unburdened user that I think just pairs with Tapu Koko like, yeah, I guess peanut butter pairs with jelly, or like chicken pairs with rice in my instance. You definitely want to see evil on the Tapu Koko teams, and it's just not present here. There's a Persian Alola instead, and Persian Alola is typically a decent mon, but Thievul just feels like the healthier, better pick for this squad as it's Unburdened. And I see the Hawlucha, yes. Hawlucha is kind of gimmicky to me. I don't think it's as consistently good as Thievul is on Koko teams. I think it's okay, but I don't know. Like, I really want to like this team. I think that there's a lot of good mons here, and a ton of good like utility and a pretty decent amount of power too. But I just like can't really rate this team that much because I missed the Koko Thievul on it.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. Like, Persian A is a superior Pokemon to Thievul in 99% of team comps, and this might be the one where it's not because it's got the Tapu Koko on it. And I say this as someone who is completely biased, who has played Koko Thievul in multiple seasons, so maybe I'm missing something here. But looking beyond that, right, like, let's see what the rest of this team does. Latios is a really flexible piece. Generally, I like it as a max offensive option. Mamoswine, I like more than some other people in the server do, but it's got decent output. Darmanitan's got a lot of output. Hawlucha, you can set up with. Haunter can do some neat stuff. Like, there's some cool tools on this team. It's a little soft to Trick Room, and by a little soft to Trick Room, I mean you better hope Greydilly and Golisopod can beat whatever they have that's setting Trick Room against you, because if Trick Room goes up, you're going second with this team a lot of the time.
Right.
But
yeah, I think I agree with you on that front. Golisopod and Greydilly, they're fine Pokemon. Typically, neither of them want to max, which makes it a little hard if TR goes up. Then, and you like don't Dynamax your Greydilly or Golisopod, then you could really see yourself getting swept under Trick Room. But yeah, I mean, like you were saying, there's a lot of power on this team, and power does typically yield decent results.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that. I think it's a good team. I just think that it's got some more noticeable weaknesses than the teams that ended up rated higher than it. Like, it looks like a team that has a lot of the bones of a great team, but it's not quite there yet.
Right, and I think we also one last thing. We also missed there's two fighting types on this team, which typically I'm not a very big fan of. I think fighting is pretty bad in this format. But one of the fighting types is a Justified Mon, and he does have Persian Alola. The one good thing Persian Alola does for this team is beat up that Lucario for
Thievul
potential.
Also has beat up.
True, Thievul better. Never mind. All right, on to the next team.
All right. So in the 10th spot, we've got Jaden's team. This is a team we had a lot of disagreement on on each of our rankings to come out to a cumulative 10th spot. But it's got the Primarina, Entei, Tornadus, Liepard, Cofagrigus, Kartana, Kommo-o, Sandaconda, Mr. Rime, Poliwhirl. Poliwhirl doesn't count. Let's not really talk about that Pokemon.
Yeah, that's fine.
Mr. Rime's a great support option, but what I really want to focus in here is the Cofagrigus, Liepard, Tornadus, T. Like, that trio just gives so much control over the board state. You've got the Trick Room, you've got the Fast Tailwind, and then you've got the Prankster support as well. And then if you have a bunch of Pokemon that are between base speeds like 50 and 85 that are really going to be able to take advantage of those three, you're going to be able to either run a fast mode or a slow mode, and your opponent has to be prepped for both, and you could even threaten both on team preview and they won't know exactly what's coming. And then this team really delivers because the Primarina, the Kommo-o, and the Sandaconda can all go either fast or slow. Entei and Kartana both are more towards the fast side, but there's just so much flexibility with the board state control of this team, and it's got just enough power to justify it. I would have liked to see a grass type that isn't the Kartana, but I'm sure we'll get into that from your critique of this team. But overall, I like a lot of what this team does. I've run Torn I and Primarina before, and Torn T isn't going to be that different, I don't think, in the context of this team. So I'm looking forward to seeing what Jaden does. But why don't you give us your thoughts on this team?
So, with most of what you said, I agree with. I think that the ability for this team to play fast and slow is nice. I typically don't love seeing slower Mons, forced to play on faster teams. I find that Mons like Sandaconda and Primarina typically like to be slow, otherwise they're not quite bulky enough, because typically that HP investment that you get from running the Trick Room edition over the speed investment that you're forced to run on Tailwind editions of teams, I typically find it goes a long way with bulk. And so I don't love Primarina Torn T. I know that you obviously have a different opinion on that, but that's just what I think. I hate Kartana. I really do. I want to like it, but its weaknesses are just like so easily exploited that it can be really hard to get productivity out of it. And because it's such an anchor, I think it's like an 80-point Mon on the tier list. I think it's like one of those tier 2 picks. That's a really hefty toll to pay for a Pokemon that is as exploitable as Kartana is. So I really struggle with that pick. And most of the Mons here just don't feel quite strong enough to me on like initial setup. Like Entei is not renowned for its power, more renowned for its ability to do damage and support at the same time. Sandaconda typically takes some time to set up, and Kommo-o is kind of the same way. So yeah, I think with how you described it, you think this team has just enough power. I don't. I don't think this team is quite strong enough. So I have a little bit of a harder time, getting into this squad. But I do see the good stuff that you're talking about. I have been humbled by Cofagrigus in the past, and Liepard is an exceptionally good support Pokemon. So there's definitely some stuff here. I just don't think the team is quite strong enough, and I don't like seeing slower Pokemon on Tailwind teams, or like in Tailwind modes. It just isn't ever like comfortable to me. So
yeah, and I'll also admit a bit of personal bias here. I am using a Torn T, Liepard, Kommo-o, Sandaconda team in another league right now that also has Volcanion, which is functionally Primarina Entei. So I understand that I have some kind of bias in favor of this kind of comp, seeing it do well, but I definitely see the critiques here, especially the Kartana, because Heat Wave is a move that exists, and every time I prep against Kartana, I'm just like, I'm gonna attack Heat Wave on 3 Pokemon, and I don't need to worry about this thing.
Exactly, and you can kind of say the same thing about like Kommo-o too, like with Dazzling Gleam.
Except Kommo-o is much bulkier, so you're not getting as many KOs without stab.
Yeah, I'll give you that, but it's not strong either.
Right.
Like it takes that turn to set up the clanging soul or swords dance or dragon dance or fucking belly drum. It gets everything, but I do see your point. I don't know. This team is a weird one to me. I'm not like loving it as much, but I can see why you think that the bones of it are good.
Yeah, it's definitely something that I would draft because I have drafted it before and am currently playing with it. But moving on to our number 9 ranked team, we've got Pedons, who does not have Dragapult this season. But what is on this team? Why don't you break us down for us, Eleanor?
Yeah, so I've been made aware before we started recording that Pedons drafts Dragapult pretty much everywhere they go. Unlucky to not get it this time around, but I do think you got almost the next best thing in the form of Spectrier. And my first impression of this team is that, Spectrier plus Clefairy is a very powerful combination, so this is good stuff. And Gothitelle is kind of the same way. Gothitelle is very strong. Not in the sense that it does damage, but the trapping ability plus fake out means Spectrier can get going a little quicker. And the rest of the team is a little bit less straightforward. You've got, Lapras and Copperajah. Weezing is an interesting fit on this team with that second fairy typing. Turtonator as a good Trick Room, like budget Trick Room sweeper on a team that doesn't have a super good way to proc its weakness policy, but Electivire is a fantastic physical electric type, supremely good coverage. Ninjask is an interesting mon. Rhyhorn is not. Neither is Meowstic. And, Emolga is okay for what it is. It's an electric type that is immune to... an electric flying type that is immune to electric, and, being a flying type is immune to ground. So there are certainly a lot of Pokemon on this team. Whether I can say I love a lot of them or not is a little more debatable. For me, I think Spectrier is really dangerous, but oftentimes Spectrier is dangerous when it can both Dynamax and be offensive, which this team does a great job of supporting. But Spectrier's the thing that makes Spectrier from good to elite is that Spectrier is often a fantastic support mon. And on this team, it's a little bit foggy as to what exactly Spectrier is going to be supporting on this team. I guess, maybe Will-O-Wisp and Snarl next to Lapras is an option, but overall, you typically want something a little more dangerous of a Dynamax threat than Lapras for your Spectrier to be supporting. So, and for the rest of the Pokemon, I just feel pretty much underwhelmed by everything that isn't one of those top 3 picks and Electivire.
Yeah, I think there's some interesting things going on with this team. You're right. It's very limited in what it wants to max. It's the Spectrier, the Lapras, and the Copperajah, maybe the Turtonator sometimes. It does have a couple different speed control options, both fast and slow. No Tailwind, I don't believe, but it does have some other cool ways to do it. It's got some trappy stuff it can do. This team has a lot of tools, and I like toolsy teams a lot of the time, but I'm worried about the raw power of this team. Late game, a Pokemon switches in, and you need to pick up a KO from 75% health, and it's not Spectrier. Do you trust any other Pokemon on this team to pick up a KO with a stab attack?
Maybe Electivire, but besides that, it's not looking super great.
Yeah, and I think that's where I struggle with this team, is that it doesn't have that sort of closing power of, okay, I've won the early and the mid game, and now I just need to send in my late game Pokemon and win the game by just going KO, KO, KO. It doesn't have that outside of that Spectrier, and Spectrier's coverage is super, super limited. I also think just tangentially, the Emolga is made reductive by the Electivire, so those could be points elsewhere, but that's a smaller criticism. Do I think
there's
it's a good team?
Oh, no, go ahead.
I was going to say, do I think it's a good team? Yes, but it might struggle to close out sets. But what were you saying?
I think that there's just like a couple of mons that a team like this could consider adding that would really bring it up, and I think that one of those Pokemon would be Regidrago. And Drago is an interesting option because it is ultimately just like one of those Pokemon where you use Spectrier in the early game to Dynamax and get rid of the fairy types that get in Drago's way, and then you can bring Drago in and Dragon Energy to your heart's content in that late game. And I feel like that's like a mon that could really be value on this team. And I know that I'm taking a little bit of Goomer's team from PDCL Livewire. Or no, not Livewire.
He was in Voltage, I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
Where he used Regidrago plus Ninjask. And I think realistically that's actually not a terrible option, that this team could take advantage of. Ninjask with the ability to Airstream, the ability to Max Darkness next to a mon like that. Because right now, you're right, it's like lacking a lot of immediate power. And I think that there are some mons that are actively at fault. And the one that you specifically have pointed out on this team is that Wheezing Galar, which is a Pokemon on this squad that just does not make a whole lot of sense.
Yeah, I think, okay, so the Wheezing on this team is interesting. Like, a lot of this team really likes their abilities, right? Basically everything but the Lapras really likes the abilities, like even Lapras to some extent. But does anything love its abilities more than, say, I don't know, just an Incineroar, for example, if you're able to shut down the Intimidate there. Not necessarily into this team, but you know what I mean, like a sheer force Pokemon. Like, there's a lot of things where Wheezing might be better. Unburdened Pokemon, for example, it might make this team slightly better because what it loses isn't as good as what the opponent loses, but that's a lot of investment for those cases, which I don't think are going to be super frequent.
Yeah, and I realistically think that it's just like a lot of resources invested in strange places. Like, this is a team that has all 12 Pokemon, and to be completely honest, like, teams with 12 Pokemon are typically, and they're just spread far too thin most of the time with their point investments. And so with this team, you've specifically got 30 points sunk into Meowstic Female and Emolga, which could be invested into like something that might be capable of dealing damage as a max threat or in the late game. So it makes it a little bit hard to justify having the points spread out all that thin. So yeah, I struggle with this team a little bit because I see like almost a bigger picture, but it feels like it could become something really dangerous. But as of right now, it's almost there, but not quite for me. It's like still like right around that number 9, number 10 spot. And yeah, I'd like to see what this team can do, and maybe even see some trades for it, because yeah, I think this team is a couple of dangerous Pokemon away from being one of the most dangerous teams in this division.
Yeah, I can agree with that, but let's go ahead and move on to Matt's team. So, okay, let's go with Tapu Lele. I'm not going to name every Pokemon in this team. We're going to go Tapu Lele and Starmie. You got Expanding Force there, you've got a Max Starmie, you've got a Max Lele, you've got a lot of options there. Blaziken's a speed booster. Diggersby is a really good Pokemon that has the second strongest Max Quake in the game, behind Sand Force, Landorus, and Carnot. You've got 3 different Pokemon that can Unburden with 2 different terrain setters, so you can run double Unburden if you want. You probably shouldn't, but because all the Unburden Pokemon are like mid at best. But and then you end up with Corviknight. And then you've got Corviknight to round it out. Okay, this team's weird. Yeah, there's no real way around it. Its speed tiers aren't great, but its speed control, I'm not going to say it's great, but it's at least very, very good. Oranguru is a decent Trick Room setter, and then you've got 3 different Unburdened Pokemon, 2 of which can give you a variety of speed control measures. you're not soft to Trick Room, you're not soft to Tailwind. You can start outspeeding people with Speed Boost Blaziken. I don't know. I like this team, but I don't know if I fully understand it. And it's just weird, and I thought it should be put, just at 8 because I had no idea what really to make of it overall, so I just put it at 8. Give me a better idea about this team, because I feel like I'm babbling.
Yeah, so with this team, there's just like a lot. This team is sensory overload, the team. Like, you just look at it and you say, all right, there's a lot of damage here. There are a lot of Pokemon. Like I said about the last team, I will say about this team also. There's 12 Pokemon. You don't have to draft 12 Pokemon. You can draft 10. And so that makes it feel a little bit weird to have, a couple of those extra picks. Realistically, I don't love baby value. Or I like baby value in the form of one baby value mon. And this team has 2 baby value mons that are both essentially doing the same thing. Swirlix and Drifloon both essentially provide speed control. They both provide damage control in certain ways. And ultimately, I actually think Swirlix is just the far superior of the two. Considering that, Drifloon, its niche is that, it has Tailwind, but Swirlix has String Shot and Cotton Spore, so, they both can do the same job effectively, but Swirlix also has Charm. Swirlix has weakness policy proccing moves with, like, Surf. It gets, I think I said Charm already, but it gets, like, Fake Tears for your special attackers, so I think Drifloon is kind of redundant on this team. The only thing it has that's special in any way is, the immunities to ground and normal and fighting, I suppose. But fighting, you're like not really scared of fighting types with a team like this anyway. And you have ways to deal with ground types with a far superior Tailwind setting flying type in Corviknight to begin with. So I don't know. There's some redundant pieces here. Pincurchin to me always just feels way better as a Trick Room sweeper than it does as a terrain setting Pokemon. So like a lead of like Pincurchin plus Sceptile is not really as threatening as like Tapu Lele plus Sceptile or Tapu Lele plus Swirlix or something. Mm-hmm. So that's like a little bit weird to me. And then the last thing I've particularly noticed here is triple Psychic types as well. I know you pointed out each of these Pokemon specifically. I think Lele is fantastic, and I think Oranguru is good. My question marks fall on Starmie, because Starmie is neither bulky nor strong. It is just like fast, and it has some utility. So I can see why it would be like interesting, but ultimately I'm just not so sure it's like great, and that's why it's kind of my pick, because I'm curious to see like what Starmie is actually going to produce. Otherwise, I mean, the sky's the limit for this team. I could name 100 different synergies that Matt could just lead on turn 1 of any game. I think that's where the strength of this team comes in, is that there are 100 different synergies, and if you don't lead properly for every single one of them, you might just get caught off guard and fucked up by something that you're not ready for. So
yeah, this is gonna be, I don't know, this is gonna be the team where I'm gonna want to click the video right away every time to see like, okay, what's going on? Oh my god, why is there Assault Vest Sceptile? Like, just that's a conversation I'm gonna have at some point. I don't know if that's it specifically, but just it's gonna be something random like that. So I'm looking forward to seeing how this team gets played.
One thing I wish this squad had is a good way to proc Corviknight's weakness policy. That's like a really dangerous item for Corviknight to have, and with most weakness policy mons, you typically want to guarantee that you have a way to proc it yourself.
Scarf Discharge Pincurchin.
Oh, yeah, my apologies. How could I possibly have forgotten about Discharge Pincurchin? I mean, realistically, you don't need ways to proc your own policy, but it can be really nice, especially if your opponent's just like not doing it for you. Mm-hmm. That could be a really good thing to have. So I'm not loving the fact that this team doesn't have one. I guess Thunder Punch Sceptile is about the only thing I could really think of, but I'd love to see like a fast Volt Switcher on this team potentially. Maybe enhance that a little bit. because Corviknight's an incredible Pokemon, and it just doesn't. It feels like probably one of the best parts about this squad, and it just doesn't feel like it's being well supported here. I would like to see more for Corviknight on this team, but otherwise, the sensory overload and the amount of just raw shenanigans that could come to turn one of this squad makes it just like right in the middle for me. That's why I have it here.
Yeah, this is definitely an interesting one. But moving on, number 7, we have Joey. Do you want to give us the breakdown of this team?
Yeah, I mess with this team heavy. I really like Moltres Galar in this format. I think it's a fantastic Pokemon. And it's got some options for it. It's definitely got some, I guess I would say, new styles of playing with Moltres. Big fan of Ninetales as well. So, you know, you got that Moltres Ninetales synergy where Ninetales can do a couple things. It can set up the Aurora Veil for the Moltres. It can, it can like Ice Shard for weakness policy. It can Icy Wind for that initial speed control. It can even benefit off of Moltres Max Darknesses by blizzarding on the next turn after the special defense gets dropped. So Ninetales is great. Arctozolt is also great. Electric resist for Moltres. Ice resist for Moltres. That's good stuff. The Mon I am most intrigued by on this team, I have Nidoking there. And that's because, in theory, Nidoking helps check all 3 of Moltres' main weaknesses while still being able to let Moltres Dynamax. So Moltres, typically, the way people prep for that Mon, there's a couple of ways. They will bring super effective rock Pokemon, lightning or electric type Pokemon for max lightning, and fairy type Pokemon. And Nidoking has a positive matchup into all of them. You know, Stab Ground for the electric and rock types, and then Stab Poison for the fairy types means that Moltres will be a little more free. And I really can appreciate that as a pick. I can see why Joey made it a priority to get Moltres and Nidoking first. I also really like Ferrothorn as well. Ferrothorn is a fantastic switch out from Moltres. So, you know, Ferrothorn can eat up those Rock Falls and Overgrowths. Or not Overgrowths, but Rock Falls and... What's the fairy type one? I can't remember. Yeah, Starfall, there it is. And those Lightnings as well. So, overall, while it isn't the typical support you see on a Moltres team, I think that Joey has done a great job of surrounding Moltres with good switch outs and proper Pokemon to pair next to it while Moltres is Dynamaxed, which is a really cool thing. The thing I'm not as big of a fan of is like this Trick Room mode that got teched on here with Mimikyu and Wishiwashi. I don't love that nearly as much. And I'm not a huge fan of having Impidimp be your only fake out. But other than that, I mean, even Duraludon is relatively good on this team because of, you know, this team doesn't love Trick Room, fighting against Trick Room when you're playing around a Dynamax Moltres. But Duraludon is often a very effective Mon at, you know, sniping those Trick Room options with Max Steel Spike, Max Wormwind, Max Darkness. It can be really good for that. So, yeah, overall, lots of options, and I'm curious to see how this team will work. What do you think about this team and how they have built around Moltres Galar?
So I think it's really interesting. I know that initially he had Raichu on this team and he dropped it for the Nidoking. So that was a hard pivot into this Nidoking from a Raichu, which it has its pluses and its minuses. So he lost the fast Volt Switch, obviously, but he got that sort of attack on the weaknesses and a lot more staying power with the Moltres. And I think I like it being played like that because it gives it a lot more like potential nasty plot setup moments. You can run Life Orb on it a bit more freely. I think there's a lot of ways that can work well. Duraludon also covers a good chunk of the weaknesses there, and he does have a viable Trick Room mode as well. But I picked the Arctozolt as my highlight for this team because I think outside of that Moltres, it's going to be the thing that maxes the second most on this team. Like, Wishiwashi and Duraludon also have an argument there, but I think this Arctozolt being able to max Ice, max Electric, and max Ground, that's going to be some really good coverage that the Moltres doesn't have access to, and it's going to be hitting things that the Moltres normally can't hit as well. So I think that that's going to be a really interesting complement to pair with a lot of the top end of this team, and that's why I kind of like this team synergistically. Like, yeah, it's a bit weird. You kind of miss the proc on the Moltres, but I understand the way that it's playing, and I think it's a unique take on the team that I think has the tools to be successful.
Yeah, I have very little to add. Lairon is not real, but Impidimp is. So Impidimp can, actually provide some level of support for this squad. I mentioned earlier that it's the team's only fake outmon, which inherently means it has value. But it can do beyond that. Fake Tears is really good support for this primarily special attacking squad. So, yeah, I think that there's not a whole lot of wasted Pokemon on this team. I'm just, I know you like the Trick Room mode a little bit more than I do.
Yeah.
But honestly, this is a solid team, and I love seeing Moltres being built around in creative ways. So, yeah, we're really looking forward to seeing what Joey does here.
All right, and up next, well, it would have been my turn, but we can switch for these last couple because I don't feel like tooting my own horn. So why don't you break down my team at first?
Yeah, so this team drafted Lurantis. That automatically makes it at least top half team alone because Lurantis is godlike. That's pretty much it. Meowstic is a great Lurantis partner, and otherwise, Crobat can set up Tailwind for potentially fast Lurantis, and Runerigus can set up Trick Room for slow Lurantis. You could even run Scarf Dracovish with Bulldoze to proc your Lurantis' Contrary and give it a speed boost while speed dropping everything else. So good for Lurantis there. And then, yeah, that's pretty much it. I'm not sure what T-Tar is doing here. T-Tar is kind of mid, but at least this team has Lurantis to make up for it. So, yeah. Also redirection. That's the thing this team has. Volcarona's cool. Not as cool as Lurantis is, of course, but the thing that's unforgivable about this team that keeps it from being number one is Dan actually thought that he could use another grass type that wasn't Lurantis on this team. Had the audacity to pick that Morlul. Honestly, don't even know what he was thinking there. He only needs Lurantis. That's the only grass type he'll ever need. So
we all know Morlul's not a real Pokemon. It's just, I had to Google it the first time I saw that name when someone tried drafting it at one point. I'm like, that's not a real Pokemon, and apparently it is. So now it's on my team. But yeah, I'm happy with the team. I've got Tailwind, I've got Trick Room, I've got Weather, I've got Redirection, I've got Prankster support, and I've just got a bunch of things that can hit hard around that. That's basically all I could ask for in this draft, the way that I was deciding to handle this draft.
Yeah, I do genuinely think this is a really good team with a lot of options, and it's not even like a sensory overload type of deal. It's just like you have lots of good options to bring, and you can find ways to make stuff work against your opponents. There's a couple of questionable picks that keep it from being higher for me. I don't love Toxicroak, especially because it's on a sand team here, and typically that mon is liking to rock the Focus Sash, so sand is actively bad for it. But Fake Out, good, decent moves, so not awful. The more unforgivable one for me is Doughblade, just because it's kind of weird. Not really quite strong enough, and not really bulky enough either. I understand base 150 defense with the Eviolite is no joke, but Steel Ghost is not a particularly good defensive typing with so many ways to take advantage of its bad special defense. So we'll be curious to see if that Pokemon is able to make an impact on your team. But otherwise, I love everything else on this squad. I think you have a lot of great options here.
Yeah, Doughblade's something that I've played around with drafting a couple different times, and I'm glad to finally pull the trigger on it to give it a shot. But, yeah, there are tools here. There's a lot of things that hit hard. It's a me team, so I'll have some fun with it this season. I've already run Max Lightning Tyranitar. It is what it is. Moving on. So I will take number 5, and this is Sasso's team. So technically, Sasso and I tied in our overall rankings, but I did give him the tiebreaker here because I just love Tornadus I teams. Like, from previous teams that I've drafted, Tornadus I Sylveon we know is insane. Tornadus I Araquanid's pretty good. I'll let you talk about Tornadus I Haxorus. Chandelure's a good Pokemon with speed control, and it can imprison Trick Room. Beheeyem Araquanid is actually not the worst Trick Room mode in the world. Like, Beheeyem's not a great setter, but Araquanid's one of the better sweepers. Persian's decent value support for its cost, same with Magneton and Kubfu. Magneton can also run like an offensive Scarf set if it wants. Like, there's, again, it's a lot of tools, but it checks a lot of boxes that I like, and it has some pretty obvious coherent game plans. Like, there's not a lot to dislike about this team, which is why I think it's pretty, I have it at number 5, because, you know, it's just solid from top to bottom. Like, there's like no major complaints about it from my end. But what do you think about Sasso's team?
Yeah, there's some stuff here. You mentioned Beheeyem. I think Beheeyem sucks, but fortunately, Sasso did himself a favor by drafting a real Trick Room setter when he drafted Chandelure there, which means that Araquanid gets like a real Trick Room setter to pair next to it, which, great, that's awesome, fantastic. I love Tornadus, and Tornadus Incarnate to me feels like one of the most criminally worst drafted around Pokemon like of all time to me. That's not worded very well. I think people suck at drafting Tornadus teams realistically.
Yes.
There's been like, I've seen far too many teams that draft Tornadus and it's like, yes, this is good Pokemon, good pick, excellent start, and the rest of the team just like is not great. This is not an example of a team like that. They have done themselves a favor. They've drafted real Dynamax options to pair next to Tornadus, so that Tornadus is not the best max option on the team, which is awesome, fantastic. You've used Sylveon before, which means you should know the answer to this question. Sylveon's ability Pixelate does affect Dynamax moves, right? So
Probably.
Hyper Beam, you don't know.
I'm going to be honest, I just know it does a lot of damage.
Touche. I mean, even those hyper voices, right? Like Choice Specs or Pixel Plate hyper voices with the Pixelate ability is really good. And I mean, you can probably Dynamax it. Even if it doesn't work like that, you could still probably get value out of like Moonblast with Max Fairy.
Yeah, you can run Sludge Wave on your Tornadus and put Weakness Policy on it because it's got so much special defense.
That's fucking sauce right there. That's actual heat. And you could do the same thing with like Chandelure paired with like Brutal Swing as well, which is really cool. Mm-hmm. I mess with that.
Weakness Policy Serena. You got all the options.
Yeah, literally everything. I love Araquanid as well. Araquanid is just one of those Pokemon. It just is so strong. And the ability to, like, its ability does 3 broken things, right? Like, it takes away a weakness, takes away the ability to get burned, and doubles the damage of water moves, which is just inherently broken. So it's a fantastic Pokemon. Even on, I was saying earlier about another team that I don't like it when Slowmons are on Tailwind teams. That does not apply when the Tailwind setter is Tornadus Incarnate. Tornadus is just that guy. He's the best at what he does. Arguably over Whimsicott, but we can talk about that later.
Yeah, it also doesn't apply when you can have an effective base power of over 1,000 on a move like Araquanid can.
Exactly. So yeah, Araquanid, like typically, like I was saying earlier, I don't love it when slow mons are forced to be fast for Tailwind, but Araquanid is the exception because it's just so good. And then yeah, you said I should talk about Haxorus. I think Haxorus is great. Uh, Sneakily bulky when it's able to Dynamax and very strong. Also, multiple Unnerves on this team is really nice. Unnerve Persian and Unnerve Haxorus are great, and so is Mold Breaker as well. So you can ignore Sturdy and shit like that. There's only a couple of picks here that I don't love. Obviously, my feelings about Beheeyem. I don't think it's good. I don't love Bad Sharp either. I think that that's like not your best pick. We were talking earlier, and Dan brought up a good point to me where if you really wanted Defiant on your team, Tornadus is just better than Bad Sharp at being a Defiant mon, and Tornadus is just a fantastic Pokemon on its own. So like, I have a hard time justifying that. The Bad Sharp pick, and then Sasso, I don't know why you took the Kubfu bait. They literally moved that Pokemon up to tier 6 for no reason. And it still got picked.
Because apparently it's draftable in tier 6. That's the reason. The end.
I don't
argument.
I don't get it. On this team specifically, it actually could see some use as Scarf coaching, I suppose, because Haxorus is strong, Araquanid is strong, Zarina and Physical Tornadus are strong, so it can make some sense here. But yeah, I don't love Bad Sharp and I don't love Beheeyem, but otherwise, as you were saying, team is immune to Fake Out because of Zarina. Team is immune to Snarl Spam because of Defiant on Tornadus, not on Bad Sharp. Team is immune to berries. Like, there's just so much here that is in your face with this squad, and I like it a lot. Lots of power, lots of speed control, good stuff overall. I like this team.
Yeah, it's definitely going to be a team to watch moving forward. But moving on, we've got Depiz's team, and I will let you take this one because this is another one where we had strong disagreements on.
Yeah, so I actually had this as my number one team, which Dan did not. So we were able to get it in this happy medium of 4th place. I think very highly of Regigigas, and I know that that's probably like kind of a hot take. I know that Regigigas tends to get a little bit of hate just for being what it is. It is an exploitable Pokemon. But the thing about this squad is that it has lots of other options besides just the Regigigas stuff. I mean, Garchomp is a fantastic Pokemon. Very strong stabs, very strong coverage moves, and very good partner for Whimsicott, who can just support it in a number of different ways. As well as Incineroar as well. Incineroar is a really good threat. An interesting pick I saw here is also that Thundurus Therian. That's an interesting one to me. It's a strong mon, and I think that this team may have liked seeing a good flying type that could click Max Airstream. Thundurus typically isn't that guy unless you want to run like a mixed Thundurus set, which I don't know if you've ever experienced, like messed around with that, but to me, Thundurus Therian trying to use Max Airstream just doesn't sound nearly as good.
No, it's not good.
But overall, there's lots of stuff here. You have multiple ways to support the Gigas, with Weezing and with Whimsicott, being able to click Worry Seed onto it. That allows for a little bit more reckless play with Weezing, and I think that a reckless Weezing is the best way to use Weezing. On Regigigas teams, it gives you huge momentum swings. So overall, I think that that's really nice. And yeah, this team does not hate having Weezing on the board either. Like, Garchomp typically doesn't give a shit about its ability. Thundurus most of the time doesn't care about its ability. So Weezing is not just partner for Regigigas. It's actually relatively good next to a lot of stuff. And I mean, yeah, you even have like Imprisoned Trick Room with the Gallade on this team. I'm not going to talk about Skarmory. I don't think it's good. Same with Clawitzer or Vanillite. But this is definitely a team that's a little more up my alley, considering that most people know at this point that I really like these draft top-heavy draft styles. So, yeah, I like this team a lot. I think this is probably some of the best stuff you could ask for out of a Regigigas team.
So it might be some of the best stuff you can ask for out of a Regigigas team, but I think we just disagree on how good or bad Regigigas is, because I'm convinced Regigigas is just bad in draft, generally speaking.
That's fair.
Yeah, I mean, that's just personal experience. I know it's not like... I know there's going to be cases where it does well, but I think in a league that's going to be this high level, people are going to know how to play around it and prep around it, and it's going to be one of those things that's going to be more easily neutralized. And with that being said, a lot of the ways you want to neutralize it are really similar to the ways that you want to neutralize Garchomp. You want to burn it, or you want to slow it down with Icy Wind or a max normal attack, like Max Strike. Like, those are the best ways to start handling Regigigas to make sure that it doesn't start steamrolling you, and that really works against a Garchomp too. So I know that that's not necessarily the end-all be-all for this team, but it does make it a bit more one-dimensional in my mind. Like, it's going to have to rely a lot more on this Whimsicott, and contrary to the team we saw before this with the Tornadus, I don't think it supports the Whimsicott as well as Sasso's team supports the Tornadus, which is why I had Dempsey's team a bit lower. Like, I didn't have, like, bottom of the barrel or anything, but I didn't have it, you know, at the top where you had it. So, yeah, I mean, that basically sums up my thoughts here. Like, I know Incineroar is good if you know what you're doing with Incineroar. I know the Garchomp is good if you know what you're doing with Garchomp. Thunderous Tea, I've run it once, actually, not a couple times, and it was okay. It wasn't like the best performer for me, but I understand conceptually that it's good. But it's one of those top-heavy drafts. It's not going to have as much flexibility in sets as I like to see in top-heavy drafts. So I'm not 100% sold, but I mean, it's going to be a solid team. Not too much more to say beyond that.
Yeah, you have that Clawitzer picked as your Pokemon that you were the most intrigued by. Go a little bit into that real quick before we move on.
Yeah, so Clawitzer is amazing at non-max. Like, we all know that. I want to see how this team can potentially use it in the Trick Room mode, because this team's Trick Room mode is really suspect, and it's basically Clawitzer, Gallade is the Trick Room mode, maybe Skarmory.
Incineroar, technically.
Yeah, I guess Incineroar. Yeah, Incineroar too. And I feel like opponents are going to force this team into Trick Room a lot of the time. So I really want to see how the Clawitzer plays in a max format when it's going to be forced in a lot of the time, I think. Because I do think it's going to be something that he's going to be forced to bring consistently against common counterplay that he's going to find for his main modes.
Yeah, that's a fair statement. I completely agree with that.
But moving on, I will take team number 3 with Toxic. So, Toxic has Dragapult, Arcanine, Melodic, Tangrowth, Alchemy, Aerodactyl, Gothorita, Vikavolt, Cryogonal, Silvally. Everything on this team except Silvally makes sense. Maybe not Cryogonal. The first 8 Pokemon, at least, are really, really good. However many that is. Maybe that's 8. Really, really good. The bottom 2, you know, they're decent as well. But I mean, everything just flows together. Like, does he have a Trick Room setter? Is it the best? It's not the best, but he does have a Trick Room setter. He's got a Tailwind setter. He's got something that's faster than base 130. He's got ways to deter, intimidate, like multiple. He's got redirection. He's got sleep pressure. He can stop his team from sleeping. He can stop his team from being taunted. The offensive output is a bit suspect outside of the Vikavolt, because Dragapult's offenses aren't as good as you think they are. Neither are Arcanines or Aerodactyls. So that's the biggest downside, like why this team probably isn't higher in our rankings, is that the initial offensive output's going to be a little low for this team. but it's got a lot of different setup options. It even has the decorate stuff. Like, this team can just do so many things and attack you from so many ways, but it's going to have to choose the way that it wants to do that, because it's not going to have sort of that natural come in and do stuff. I guess Dragapult is a come and do stuff Pokemon, but I think this team's going to be more successful when it decides on a unique angle of attack that you aren't prepped for, and I think that Toxic's the type of coach that is going to be able to take those unique angle of attacks. But what do you think about this team?
Yeah, I like this team. Cryogonal makes a little more sense to me because of its ability to Ice Shard. So Ice Shard into Dragapult for weakness policy setup is something to take into consideration, as well as potentially Aerodactyl. It can Ice Shard into both of those mons to set weakness policy, and then it has the utility of being able to quick Icy Wind, quick Freeze Dry. After the policy is procced, maybe get some value out of that. I think it gets a couple of like interesting weird moves that you don't really expect. So it's overall like not the worst Pokemon, and I just blatantly think that you are incorrect about Silvally, as most people are with regards to that Pokemon. I think Silvally is one of the best Pokemon in non-max, and in Dynamax is an incredibly good Pokemon. It just is typically not used very well, and I'll say that. I'm gonna be that guy. I'm gonna say it. I think that people don't exactly know how to bring out the best in Silvally, but there's a lot to like about this team, though, beyond just that. Gothorita is obnoxious and can be paired with a lot of different mons on this team. Dragapult, Arcanine, Milotic, and Aerodactyl, and even Vikavolt to an extent, can all really take advantage of an opponent who has led poorly and cannot switch out thanks to Gothorita. The mon for me that you were pretty high on, that I'm just a little suspect on, is that Alcremie. I get Decorate, I understand Decorate, and I understand that its abilities are actually good and that it gets some okay support moves, but like, I'm not sure Alcremie is like really cut out to do all that much, to be completely honest. I don't know. I fail to see it, I guess.
Yeah,
I fail to see the hype.
I've been convinced on it recently as a secret Dynamax threat, and then just the support options that it has. Is it the best thing in the world? No, but for the value that you get with that fairy type, and this team needing a fairy, I think it works well. Like, there are better fairies for this team, but I think that it is not going to be an active detriment to this team, which is about all you need in that slot.
That's fair. And then yeah, I guess with your what's the Decorate stuff, that is dangerous in that regard too. But yeah, I'm interested to see. I have Silvally picked as my mon of interest because I just want to see if Toxic is going to be able to get value out of it. Because it is like a really interesting Pokemon, and it is whatever type you need it to be, defensively or offensively. So,
but don't max it.
Yeah, don't max it unless you have other coverage options, because you will be very sad if you Dynamax your Silvally thinking it's going to be able to max Hailstorm something, just to find out that it's a base 95 power attack when Dynamax. So off of that multi-attack.
Yeah.
Be careful is all. Otherwise, beat up Dragapult, Arcanine, great. Tailwind, great. Trick Room, great. This is a good team. It has a lot of good mons. Good mons are good.
Yes. Everything here is a good Pokemon in a vacuum, and that's always good. But, moving on to our second ranked team. Speaking of good Pokemon in a vacuum, I'll let you break down Josh's team for us.
This meme always gets me. It's so funny. This is Celesteela Rain team. That is what this team is.
All right, moving on to our top ranked team. No, okay, keep going.
No, that's honestly pretty much it. You've got your Celesteela, and Pelipper is the better of the two rain setters for Celesteela. In Draft League, I don't think Politoed offers nearly as much as Pelipper does, just specifically with Celesteela. Seismitoad is the best rain sweeper to pair with Celesteela, so I like that pick. I like that pick a lot. I'm going to move away from Marowak because I don't like it, but I like the rest of this team pretty much. Kangaskhan is formidable as a support Pokemon with its ability to click Fake Out into Ghost types, which is really nice. And then if you don't need that, then your ability to Fake Out without fear of being faked out with Inner Focus, that's good stuff. Also fantastic coverage too, which makes it relatively decent in scenarios where it is not Dynamaxed and other Pokemon, opposing Pokemon, are not Dynamaxed either. Riolu is a really interesting pick for this squad because of its ability to click Coaching next to Toad, next to Celesteela, next to even like Kangaskhan when it Dynamaxes, or yes, even Marowak. That's good stuff. Hydreigon is a fantastic Pokemon. I have slept on Hydreigon for far too long now as a Dynamax threat. I refuse to continue doing that. Hydreigon is a good Pokemon. I'm on the Hydreigon Supremacy bandwagon now. So, yeah, there that is. And then Exeggutor is not super great, but it is a Trick Room setter, and Boltund is a Pokemon. That's about it. Ribombee is also cool because I like Ribombee's ability to give Celesteela a base 122 speed? Or 124?
Or 124. I want to say 124.
Yep, we're looking at 124. That's fantastic. Giving Celesteela a base 124 is badass. So, to lots of options with this team. This is a really diverse Celesteela team. And I think that the best part about it is that they didn't fall into the trap of just picking, these things on the meme, just the main Celesteela Raincore and having nothing else. I think this team did a great job of picking Celesteela Raincore and other good threats as well.
Yeah, I can agree with that. I think, although we do have the meme, I do think this is the best Celesteela Rain team that we've seen out of the 4 divisions. I do like the pieces around it. I think Hydreigon is best when paired with either Celesteela or Metagross as a really powerful steel type that can threaten the fairy types that threaten the Hydreigon, and this does have the Celesteela with it. I think that, I like the Ribombee and the Riolu, and even the Boltund I think could be like a weakness policy proc for the Celesteela.
That's a good point. Those Volt switches are actually really valuable, so I can see that.
Yeah, like everything makes sense. Not a huge Exeggutor fan, but everything makes sense. It's solid. It supports probably the best Pokemon in the format very well and has a team that's built around it. And we know exactly what this team does, and it's still going to be good at it.
Agreed.
With that being said, I think we can actually move on to the number 1 ranked team now, where we have Panda's team. Rillaboom, Blastoise, Rotom H, Togepi, Bronzong, Dragalge, Obstagoon, Drifblim, Avalugg, Pancham. Okay, we're going to ignore Pancham. But we've got a great Firewater Grass Core in his first 3 picks. Actually, a pretty awesome one there. Priority threat with Rillaboom. You've got the max and the setup threat with the Blastoise. Redirection for the Blastoise. If you want to set it up, you can run support Blastoise. You can set Tailwind with the Drifblim and the Rillaboom. Dragalge can outspeed base speed 130s if you wanted to Tailwind. Blastoise and Rotom can outspeed everything else in the format. Togepi can redirect for a lot of these things. Obstagoon exists, and then Avalugg can be a late game setup threat. Like, everything on this team works well together, synergizes well together, has good power, has good support, and speed control going both directions. Like, I just don't really have much to complain about this team. I think it's really quite good, and it is going to be a bit Drifblim centric because I do think the fast mode is going to end up being more consistent than the slow mode here. But even with that being said, Drifblim's a good Pokemon to have your team be centered around. So I just said a lot of words in a short amount of time, so why don't you tell us a little bit about this team?
Yeah, you certainly did. I think when I made my power rankings, I actually was not quite as high on this team as you were, but with the way things averaged out, this one still ended up being pretty clear number 1. I thought this was a top 5 team, and it is good in that regard. I think that those first 3 picks are all fantastic, and I really am a huge fan of Bronzong. That's a strong Pokemon, not in the sense of like it's actually like dealing a whole bunch of damage, but in the sense that it is able to set up, able to really just be a bulky menace, annoying like threat kind of Pokemon. Like you need to hit into this Pokemon, and while you're hitting into Bronzong, Panda's racking up a whole bunch of residual damage from Blastoise's G-Max cannonades or whatnot. So that's really nice. I like that. Dragalge is really, really strong. It's a powerful Pokemon. Obstagoon is weird. I have never seen Obstagoon do particularly well. It's like kind of hit or miss, I guess. It has decent stabs depending on what ability you run on it, but most of the time it just feels a little underwhelming. Avalugg is also kind of weird to me as well. It's like this team has a lot invested into its Trick Room mode with Bronzong, Dragalge, Togepi, and Avalugg. I guess I don't quite understand all of that. I feel like Dragalge on its own and Bronzong on its own would be just fine. Maybe Avalugg could have been something different, but you know, whatever. It is a Pokemon that can Dynamax under Trick Room, so be it. But the Pokemon I find myself the most interested on this team is the Blastoise. As you were saying, it can do so much with the tools it has. While I don't love Shell Smash next to Togepi, it's a thing that you have to be ready for, otherwise you can lose to it. And it can realistically just be like a late game Dynamax spawn that is hard to kill and deals a ton of residual damage for something like a Rillaboom or an Obstagoon or a Rotom to just clean up with as well. So yeah, I'd be really intrigued to see kind of what Blastoise is going to do on a team like this with just like so many other alternative options. And who knows, we might even get to see a little bit of weakness policy action somewhere. The big thing I would really like to see this team have is a way to Sucker Punch Drifblim so that Drifblim could also consider the weakness policy as an item.
Does Pancham not get Sucker Punch?
I don't believe Pancham is actually a dark type at all. So
oh, interesting.
So I can check real quick. It does not get Sucker Punch, so that makes it kind of a weird tier 7 value pick. Maybe look for something that has Sucker Punch instead, so that's a thing that you can threaten. But otherwise, I mean, this is certainly a squad. So
yeah, the one thing I will say about it is if you try to go fast, there are 2 different Weezing teams that just shut this down so hard. Which
very true.
Make me nervous about the fast mode a bit, but then you can just go slow. So
true.
Gotta keep that in mind.
Yeah, Togepi Bronzong, while it's a little bit on the passive side, you can really take advantage of what those 2 mons can do. Bronzong with its ability to set up Iron Defenses or Calm Minds to get it bulky and unkillable, and Togepi's ability to put things to sleep with Yawn are both very powerful. So while it may appear on surface value that you might be able to stall out Trick Room, there's still a lot to threaten here. So I think that makes it one of the better quote-unquote like passive Trick Room leads.
Yeah, click Metronome, use Dragon Ascent, and become God as Togepi.
Maybe animation-wise, I'm not sure what kind of damage you'd be looking at with that, but
not great. But the animation would be worth it.
Hey, maybe Dynamax Hustle Togepi with Play Rough. I know we saw quite the showcase from Hustle Togekiss last season at some point, so maybe Dynamax Hustle Togepi under Trick Room. Who's to say?
I am. That's bad. All right. So our final rankings. We have Panda at 1, Joshy at 2, Toxic 3, Depp is 4, Sasuke 5, me at 6. Then we got Joey, Matt, Pedons, Jaden, Ronan Stings, Books, Yasha, Robbie, Orange Soda, and Goomer's Mountain Dew theme team. Do you have any closing thoughts before we wrap up the video?
Yeah, just as a spectator, obviously I'm not in Code Red, but as a spectator watching this, I can see that a lot of attention was put by all of these coaches into their teams, into their drafts, which makes me just super excited to see how this season plays out. So really looking forward to getting to watch the content of any of you guys who make content for this division, and just keeping up with how it goes, because it's very apparent to tell that a lot of care went into these drafts. So yeah, looking forward to a wildly successful PDCL season, and yeah, just very curious to see how this is going to play out.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a great season. I'm looking forward to seeing who's going to be joining the PDPL ranks next season, as the champion is guaranteed that automatic invitation into the first Scarlet and Violet season of the PDPL. But yeah, it's big moves. But thank you guys so much for watching. If you guys enjoy this type of content, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And I will see you next time. Bye.
Be sure to subscribe to my channel too.
Yes.
Twitch.tv/DH Solanor on Twitch.
Yes, twitch.tv/DH Solanor or at the Laurantis King. All right. See you guys around. Bye.